Welcome to the Great Canadian Economic Decline. Picture this: you're standing in a grocery store in Toronto. You grab a kilogram of ground beef. The price tag reads $12.87. 10 years ago, it was just $8. You walk past the real estate office on your way home. Average house price in your neighborhood has gone to $1.2 million. A decade ago, that was $750,000. You check your bank account, your paychecks look bigger than it did in 2015, but somehow you're poorer than you were back then. And when did this all start? Well, Canada, welcome to the Canada's lost decade. And here's the kicker: it wasn't an accident. It was by choice, and it was your choice. Voting in these liberals 10 years ago, and it's been the great decline ever since. And numbers don't lie. And that's what I want to talk to you guys here today about, just the whole numbers behind the economic decline of Canada. And it's there. And I don't think people are seeing it like just spelt out this way. I just can't imagine. And please give me as many comments as you want as why you all voted back in the Liberal government after the decline you had in the Trudeau years. They ousted Trudeau for a reason, and then they just bring back in more of the same. So, would love to hear your comments as to what the Liberal government has done for you and to help you out because like I said, I just went through and analyzed all these numbers, and it's just amazing to me to see the decline, the economic decline in Canada. And it's just, I have some personal stories to tell you as well throughout this, but it's amazing to me. So let's look at the numbers. And what economists love to measure is the GDP per capita. It's literally fancy talk for how much wealth does each Canadian actually have. And this has definitely been on decline. From 2014 to 2023, under Liberal governance, Canada's GDP per capita grew by just 1.9%. And here's kind of just an overview of all the numbers here that I want to talk about. So, literally, that's the worst performance in the entire G7. And I'll have you, this graph tells it all. So, we're here, Canada is here, the little one up here, and then you have the US down here, and Germany. Like, look how far we are at the back here. It's just crazy, and especially when you look at it comparatively. Germany at this time has been dealing with an energy crisis, and they still beat Canada by 3 times. The United States, look at them, they're way ahead. They completely left Canada in the dust. So, don't just believe me. Have a listen here to this guy, and he explains it. And I saw this video, and this literally set me off. And that's why I know he kind of touches it on the GDP and how the economy is going. But that's why I really wanted to. I listened to this, and I wanted to do more of a deeper dive into it to see exactly what he's talking about. But have a listen here.
When you think about per capita, think about standard of living of yourself or the average individual in Canada. It used to be equal with the United States. Today, after the last 10 years, Canada's per capita GDP is between 28th and 33rd in the world, from third in the world. And the amount of money that we make vis-a-vis an American is just $56,000 in US dollars versus $89,000 for the average person in the US as a whole. If you look at Ontario, which is one of Canada's richest provinces, it is a GDP equal to the poorest state now in the United States, which is Mississippi. But a starker contrast, and this one sort of hit home in looking at this a few months ago. British Columbia's per capita GDP is just $56,000. Just cross the border into Washington State, and the per capita GDP there is double that of BC at $108,000. Yet, if you can believe it. Yet, and this is the kicker, the top marginal personal income tax rate in Washington State is just 37%. And in BC, it's 53%. So we make half as much money as they do, and we're taxed 30% more.
And that's just crazy. So that's where it gets really interesting. In 2014, the gap between Canadian and American GDP per capita was about $4,000 per person. By 2024, the gap exploded to $28,000. Now, let me say that again, $28,000 per person. The University of Calgary economist Trevor Tombe called this divergence stunning and unprecedented in modern history. Real GDP per capita in the US is now 50% higher than in Canada. Guys, that's literally 50%. And have a look in the graph here and how much of a spread this is. And remember, goes back. This is pre-Trump. This is like what I find is everybody has the Trump derangement syndrome up there in Canada. It's like, oh, it's Trump, it's Trump. No, you guys have been in a decline for the last 10 years, and Trump has nothing to do with that. Canada's GDP per capita fell for 8 of the past 11 quarters. Your neighborhood to the south, they're growing strong. You Canada, you guys are going backwards. But wait, there's more. The Parliamentary Budget Officer, that's Canada's independent financial watchdog, just released a report predicting sluggish GDP growth for the rest of the decade. Again, guys, it's just not looking good. The spread just keeps growing and growing. They think that their the real GDP growth will stay probably about 2% through the late 2020s. So when did this all start going wrong? And again, it wasn't with Trump. You guys can all talk about, oh yeah, Trump and the tariffs, and I will talk about that. But again, this started back in 2015, the year the Liberals took power. And there's no coincidences there. Then we also have the housing nightmare. Now, let's talk about the dream that died. And, they always talk about the great American dream, but the great Canadian dream also is just home ownership. Between 2020 or 2005, sorry, and 2025, 3 Canadian cities topped the entire continent for housing prices increases. And guess who those are? All Canadian. We have Vancouver, we got Montreal, and then we have Toronto. We're not just beating American cities. Canada is in a league all on its own for all the wrong reasons. In Vancouver, the average detached home now costs $1.93 million. In Toronto, it's $1.4 million. Even a condo in Vancouver will set you back about $800,000. The Swiss bank UBS ranked Toronto as having the highest real estate bubble in the entire world back in 2022, not just in North America, the whole entire world. And here's a stat that should just make your blood boil. From 2003 to 2018, some Canadian cities saw property prices increase by up to 337%. Again, that's 337% increase. The OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, warned in 2016 that Canada's financial stability was at risk because of these huge growing housing prices. Did anyone listen? Bloomberg Economics, they ranked Canada as having the second largest housing bubble in the entire OECD. And what that is there's 38 countries that are a member of this. And according to these 38 countries, Canada had the highest bubble in 2019 and then again in 2021. And what did the government do? They increased immigration to record levels. 3% population growth in both 2023 and 2024 without building enough homes. It's like showing up to a sold out concert with like 10,000 extra tickets. There's just no thought process behind it. And that's what's so frustrating. So again, you show up with all these extra tickets. Where do those people go? It's sold out. We're sold out. And then they're just filling it with more and more people. The average rent for a 1-bedroom apartment in Canada was $1,103 in 2015. By 2024, that increased to $1,715. That's literally a 55% increase. Young Canadians, forget about it. You're not buying a house. You can barely afford rent at this point. And this is what I find very frustrating. I'm from Toronto, literally, and I know this goes way back, but my parents bought their house in early 70s, 1973, I think, somewhere around there, for $25,000. Unfortunately, my dad got dementia, and my parents never moved from that house that I grew up in. But my dad got dementia, and we had to sell his house. I think it was right before COVID, so 2019, 2020. We sold that house for about $800,000. It was a single family home in Aurora, just north of Toronto, and it went from $25,000 to up to $800,000. And I know that's a big, big gap, but our neighbors, my neighbors had lived there. They moved to Canada from Holland. God, before my parents were there, so late 60s, early 70s. They moved from Holland to Canada. So they probably bought the house about the same price my parents bought the house. So a few years before I sold my dad's house, their kids had sold their house. Same house. They're about 1,000 square feet on the main level, and then there was basements. It's a cul-de-sac. It has about 14 homes on it, so they're all pretty much same size, same builder. And so they sold their house for $615,000, and I sold my dad's house, the one next door, probably maybe a year and a half later, for $800,000. And then they tore down my neighbor's house, and they rebuilt another house there. They sold it for $1,300,000. And when they tore down I had friends from high school that bought it. They bought that one, and so I knew them from high school, and I said, "Hey, I'm gonna sell my dad's house," and they ended up buying that. And so they tore down my dad's house, and they ended up building another house and sold it for $1,700,000. So essentially, the house next door, this is within years, went from 600,000. They bought our neighbor's house to a couple of years later, they bought my dad's house for $200,000 more. They rebuilt about the same kind of size house. They rebuilt their house and sold it for $1,300,000. A couple years later, they rebuilt kind of essentially the same thing and sell it for $1,700,000. It's just insane. And my dad's a firefighter in Toronto, and this is what really bothers me the most is that they like. And again, my dad was a big NDPer. He was he was the president of the NDP in the North York riding, so like York Region area. He was the head of the NDP there, and he always believed that you should be able to afford a home. Like Ford said, if you work for Ford, you should be able to buy a Ford car. The employees should make enough money that they can afford to buy a car that they're building. So if you're a firefighter in Toronto right now, and I don't even know how much they start at, but say you're working in downtown Toronto, you start at, I'd be aggressive here, and let's just say you start at 80,000. Can you really afford to buy a house in Toronto where you work? I don't think so. Not at those prices, and my dad was actually worked for North York before that, but then they amalgamated and ended up being Toronto. But he could afford essentially to live in kind of that area. Technically it would be the suburbs of North York back at that time, but he could afford a house that he could drive to within a reasonable amount of time. So now if you work for the Toronto Fire Department, you're making $80,000 a year to start. Where do you live? And where do you buy a home? So maybe you can rent in Toronto, but where do you buy a home? That's the big question. So again, and then I'm living in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I have a 21-year-old. He's got his first job, and he's in Scottsdale, in the prime area of Scottsdale. He's looking for a house a couple miles from his work, and he can afford to buy. He has a prequel for $500,000 house, and he's making his first job he didn't even go to school. He didn't go to college. He's selling cars at one of the dealerships in North Scottsdale, and he's making about $150,000 a year now. And he can afford to buy a house, $500,000 house, not too far from where he works, very comfortably. And if we were living back in Toronto and he was doing that, I don't think he could afford to live a couple miles from where he works. I don't think it would be feasible. So it's very interesting. But have a listen here to Charlie Kirk. I was a fan of Charlie Kirk before all this shit went down, and he just spells it out very, very clearly. So have a listen here.
We could have a Prime Minister Carney. We could have a catastrophe on our hands. Huge explosion of housing prices. A incomprehensible immigration flood. Like hard to even grasp. The patterns of what we're seeing in Canada are eerily similar to that in America. Canadians over the age of 60 and over are by far the most likely to vote for Carney because they thought he was good at dealing with Donald Trump. For younger voters, very similar to here in America, they wanted to reduce the cost of living. Canadian baby boomers don't care about the future of Canada. During the lockdowns, we saw we will sacrifice the youth to save the old mantra. Very troubling. Few people isolated this and pinpointed this. And we kind of just all believed it. Yeah, we're going to ruin our kids' lives so that we can have a better 5 years. When has that ever been the case of a Western value? That is a soft form of child sacrifice. So we're going to have young people have a worse time off. They're going to be masked. They're going to be more suicidal. They're going to be more alcohol addicted, more drug addicted, more isolated, less likely to be part of a community. But hey, at least I'm making sure that I don't get COVID, even though it wasn't nearly the threat that people thought it was. Not even close. And in Canada, we saw with the results last evening, Mr. Carney defeated the Conservative insurgency, which had a massive lead just a month and a half ago. And to be honest, President Trump's issuing of tariffs against Canada helped the Liberal Party in Canada, which, interestingly, the Conservative Party very well should have positioned themselves as a way to benefit from it. But Canadian voters said, oh, Trump is a conservative party. We want to stay liberal. The amount of people that Canada is bringing in through mass migration will destroy Canada. Canada's already basically destroyed. It's 1 million people a year. Canada is literally falling apart. Its average home price is tens of thousands of dollars higher than here in America, even though Canada has nothing but space and lower incomes than America. It is a choice.
I agree. And don't even get me started with COVID, but Charlie Kirk lived in my neighborhood here in Scottsdale, and he actually, during COVID, he went to before he even had kids, he went to the Scottsdale school board and complained about when they actually did stop kids going to school here, but we ended up going back to school way faster than Canada ever did. But he went to the school board and complained about essentially that you can't keep kids from going to school. Anyways, but he is 100,000% right. But I don't want to just stop at housing because the pain is absolutely everywhere. And I mean groceries. The 2025 food price report predicts a family of 4 will pay up to $800 more for food in 2025 compared to 2024. That's 66 extra dollars every single month. Ground beef went up 61% since 2015. Coffee, it went through the roof. Fresh, even like the fresh vegetables, things that we need on a daily basis, a kilogram that cost you a reasonable money in 2020 now costs 20 to 30% more. You know, food inflation. Actually, this is very funny. I saw this really funny video. And there was a lady, she was down here in the States. I don't know where she was, but she was from Ontario, and she found a bag of carrots from Brampton, Ontario. And it was a big bag of carrots, and it was like $1. She goes, and I live close to Brampton. And she's like, I pay for this bag of carrots. I pay she was like $2 or $3. And I'm down here in the States. They had to ship it down to the States. They had to, it's $1 here. She goes, I'm literally paying 3 times more for Brampton carrots in Ontario than I am. I think she was in Mississippi or something. It was funny, but she was paying more in the States for the exact same bag of carrots from Brampton, Ontario. It was crazy. But food inflation in Canada has hit 3.8% in September 2025, way above the Bank of Canada's target of pretty much they were at 1 to 3% at the very highest, and they're at 3.8. And get this, it's been rising steadily since hitting a low in 2024. One survey found that nearly half of Canadians report that rising prices are greatly impacting their ability to meet day-to-day expenses. Meanwhile, what's the government doing? They're doubling government spending, creating massive deficits. Federal interest payments on the debt are projected to be huge this year. Like, I'm talking about $53.3 billion in 25-26 to $82.4 billion by 3031. And that's your money going to pay interest. And think about that, guys. This doesn't go to schools, it doesn't go to healthcare, it doesn't go to infrastructure. It goes to strictly interest. The debt is projected to hit $1.66 trillion by 2030-31. And who's going to pay for that? And the older people that keep voting in these liberals, they're not the ones that are going to be paying for it. It's going to be their kids and then your grandkids. And I don't think they're seeing past, and again, it's like Charlie Kirk said, even with the COVID thing, oh, let's just worry about us and let's not worry about the kids. I think that they, and my mom is a die hard liberal, and it doesn't, I don't think if I tried to talk to her about these numbers, I'd get that, talk to the hand, I don't want to talk about it. And what bothers me the most is that she's not going to pay for it. It's going to be, my brother's kids that are going to pay for it, and the generations and so forth. That's who's going to pay for it. To ignore all these numbers is not doing anybody any good. The business investments are down by 1/3 compared to a decade ago. Productivity is 30% less than the United States. Canada's productivity in healthcare and education is 50 to 70% lower than in the United States. And these sectors make up about a fifth of the entire economy. And the OECD, and those are the 38 developed countries, ranked Canada's economic growth from 2014 to about 2022 as the 28th out of the 38 countries. That's 28th out of all. So again, these OECD, there's 38 of these developed countries. They're ranking Canada. Canada used to be third before the Liberals took over. And now Canada is going to be between 28 and 30 out of the 38 countries. So again, I know, and then everybody's got the Trump derangement syndrome, and it's Trump, Trump, Trump. But Trump was not the problem. But unfortunately, Carney, who was supposed to he voted in Carney to take care of Trump, which was an absolute joke. I would have put my money on Polyev all day long to deal with Trump. But here we go. And everybody's like, oh, we're in this mess because of Trump. Again, I'm going to go back. This whole decline started in 2015 with Trudeau and the Liberal government coming. There's a pattern here. And if you can't see the pattern, then you guys are blind. But, these tariffs, like I said, the economy, just when you think it can't get any worse, then enters the Donald Trump and his tariffs. On February 4th, 2025, Trump imposed the 25% tariffs on Canadian goods and a 10% on energy exports. By April, those tariffs on many products had risen to 35%. Just last week, he threatened another 10% increase, bringing some Canadian products to 45% tariffs. So I want to break that down to show you what that actually means in plain English. Canada sends 75% of its exports to the United States. That's 3.6 billion Canadian worth of goods and services crossing the border, and that's literally every single day. The Conference Board of Canada, estimates that these tariffs could shrink over time, but Canada's GDP being at 2.6%, and that's $78 billion, costing every Canadian about $1,900 per year. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce warns that a 25% tariff could push Canada into a recession. And I can't see anything other than that this is inevitable. And here's the true irony out of all this. Trump's tariffs will hurt Canadian consumers most. Why? Because when American products get hit with counter tariffs, what do you think Canadian companies do? Of course, they're going to pass it on to the Canadian people that are buying these goods. Already Canadian travel to the US, is down 31% this year. Canadian exports of American bourbon plunged 85% in the second quarter. These numbers are absolutely crazy. The economic relationship between our two countries, they used to be very envious for everyone. You had the free trade agreement, everything was great. And now everything is like literally going to hell in a handbasket. And Canada, they are not prepared. They have weak productivity, declining business investments, regulatory red tape that strangles innovation. They are entering a trade war with one arm tied behind their back. Again, I compared it to David and Goliath. And you guys don't have anyone smart enough. If you're David in this scenario, Carney's not your guy. You got to be very, very strategic because you're not going to win on size. You got to be, the strategy has to be number one. The US Senate just voted to nullify Trump's tariffs on Canada, but the House, controlled by the Republicans, won't even consider it. The Supreme Court is set to rule on whether Trump even has the power to impose these tariffs. But by the time they decide, the damage is already done. So, guys, it's just not looking good. And I know a lot of Canadians, they don't understand the government down here, but the Republicans literally run the House. It's almost like if they all get on board, and I must say there's been a few issues where they've kind of gone off course, but for them, the margins are pretty small. So even if 2 or 3 Republicans decide to vote the other way, it could change the progress of this all, but I I honestly think that they don't really care about the Canadians right now. So I think all the Republicans are gonna vote one way, but will be very interesting to see. I think this vote goes down in, I think in November 5th or so. But again, here's the billion-dollar question. 10 years later, and the question's hanging in the air like smoke from a tire, is this: why? Why do Canadians keep voting for this? That is the billion-dollar question. You know, this government has presided over the worst economic performance in the G7. Why do Canadians accept a lost decade while watching the American neighbors like literally flourish? It's amazing to me that Canada keeps doing this. The poverty rate did fall by 1/3 between 2015 and 2022, and that is true. Average real wages are I guess about, they're saying 9% higher than it was a decade ago, so that is also true, but here's what the politicians are not telling you, and this is where the CBC and all these federally funded news outlets will never tell you. These gains are nothing compared to what you've lost. Again, what the CBC is gonna tell you, CTV, all that, they're gonna say, "Oh, no, we're doing, your wages are 9% higher, you're doing good, you're doing good," but then they will never compare it to what you guys have lost. You might have a slightly higher paycheck, but your house is now completely unaffordable. Your grocery bill has exploded. Your cost of living has outpaced your wage gains by a mile. The government will point to immigration, which is completely out of control. And they say, well, all these new people lowered our GDP per capita. And they are partially right with that, but that doesn't change the fact that your life got harder. You know, you can't afford a home. Like I said, my kids growing up, they could not afford a home in Toronto right now. They couldn't. So one of my sons had an opportunity. He wants to be a plumber, and we have a guy down here that he's a plumber in Calgary, and he doesn't have room from here. He's like, "Oh, I can send you back up to Canada and you can get a job there." So I was like, "No way." Like his living there would be nothing, would it be like compared down to here. He would never be able to if he was working downtown Calgary, and I don't know how long he would have to work or where he would ever be able to afford a home in downtown Calgary. I have one of our goalie coaches down here. He bought a condo in Calgary. He's from Calgary, and I think he paid 200,000 for it, and it's gone up to like over 800,000. He says it's unbelievable. Thank God he held on to it, but he's like, I could never go back and buy that condo again, ever. I think he's really close to the Calgary Stampede, so he rents it out and makes some good money off it. But he's like, I would never be able to afford. I could never go back and afford to buy a home there. You know, so essentially, what you're doing is you're working harder for less. In 2024, just before the most recent election, polls showed Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives with comfortable leads. The Liberals looked absolutely done. And I think the election was stolen. I'll do a whole video on that. I really think that Trump did get involved in that. He much rather deal with Carney than deal with Poilievre all day long. You know, but technically, he just started the tariff threats, and Canadians rallied around the flag. Mark Carney, the new prime minister who replaced Trudeau, called a snap election, and suddenly the Liberals were back in the lead. And I, for the life of me, cannot figure out why that ever happened. I can't. You guys were done with Trudeau, and he causes this great Canadian economic decline, and then you just go back and vote in more. So, guys, here's the bottom line. Canada is blessed with abundant natural resources, strategic geography, an educated workforce, every advantage you could possibly ask for. And yet, under liberal governance, you become stuck. It's just literally you're like the sick man of North America. You guys should be flourishing, but it's not. It's been a complete decline. And because I go back and forth to the US and Canada all the time, I see it. And I see it. And like I said, when I go back to Canada and like 3 liters of milk is like $12, I'm like, when did that happen? I can't even imagine. And then I come down here and I can get the same thing for $2. It's just ridiculous. The Wall Street Journal observed that from 2015 to 2025, liberal economic policies doubled government spending, created massive deficits, reduced business investment by 1/3, and led to 30% less productivity than the United States, and left Canadian GDP per capita about the same. You know, Essentially, the GDP has not changed in 2024. That it's just crazy. There's been absolutely no growth whatsoever. While America's GDP, in contrast, has jumped 58%, you know, and then ours gradually growing 7.8%. So why do Canadians keep voting for this? I don't know. To me, that's the great Canadian question. Why do you keep voting for this shit to go back in? It's beyond me. And I don't know, maybe it's because you're afraid of change. Maybe it's because the value of the social programs over economic growth. I don't know. Maybe it's because you rather have equality and poverty than inequality and prosperity. It's just beyond me. Or maybe it's just because they haven't felt the pain enough. And that's the problem. I think the old dogs there just keep voting in liberal, like my mom, she'll never not vote liberal. Never, 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 like not even think about it, not vote liberal. Despite, even she won't even listen to these numbers. I know she would have turned me off a long time ago. And because she's like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. But she doesn't understand what she's affecting is her grandchildren is going to be affected. Even my brother, I don't think he's going to be affected as much, but the grandchildren will be. I don't even know if they can afford a house where they live right now. I highly doubt it. His kids are the same age as my kids. My kid's ready to go buy a house. So, you know, like what's coming from, there's no changes coming. We have the most expensive housing, higher grocery bills, crushing tariffs that make everything cost more, growing debt that our children will spend their lives paying off, continued brain drain as our best and brightest move south for better opportunities. I cannot tell you how many Canadians are down here that have and it is like, it was my example. I have one of the plumbers from Calgary. He lives down here and has started a business here. I have another client who is an electrician, has moved down here again, his business was in Calgary. They moved down here to start a business down here. And that's just kind of the trades. And think about the doctors and the lawyers and there's a ton of people here. I met a guy at work the other day. He's in the pipeline business. And he's like, they were trying to get the pipeline through Quebec. And he's like, Carney he never specified in his whole campaign if they were going to go through with that. And all of a sudden he's in power and it's not going through. And now he's doing business down here. So it's a gamut. And again, my kids play hockey, so you get around the rinks, and I say every year, I'd say 90% of the kids on my kids' hockey teams are Canadians. Just think about that. So their parents have moved down here from Canada, and we all seem to conglomerate at the rinks. But so many Canadians down here, moved their businesses down here, moved their lives. A lot of them are retired hockey players that decided to keep all their money down here and they're not going back to Canada. So, Canada, the choice is yours. You can keep voting for the same policies that brought you here. You can keep believing that the government spending and redistribution will magically create prosperity, or you can wake up and demand that something has to get better. It really does, and to me, Polyev is the answer. Um, because really right now, you're just losing, and if you keep voting in the same people, the same mentality, and the same policies, absolutely nothing will change. You're losing to countries that aren't even trying hard, and that should absolutely terrify you. The lost decade doesn't have to become the lost generation, but only if you decide to do something about it, and that's strictly just my opinion. So the big question is, does Canadians keep voting back in the same mentality, the same bullshit agenda? It will be very interesting to see. Hopefully, they're talking about getting another election, and I see Polyev out there more than ever. So hopefully, there is going to be a big revolt in Canada. So please like, subscribe, share. Let me know your comments. If you're a liberal, I'm happy to hear why you keep voting in liberals and how you can just look past all these numbers and think, oh no, we're doing great. We're good. We're doing good. So keep voting liberal. I don't know. I think there needs to be a change. Strictly, again, my opinion. And I just look at the facts and come up with my opinions pertaining to the facts that I read. And I do a lot of research before I put these videos out. So I'm looking at numbers at all different kinds of sources. And and it's just my opinion, strictly my opinion. But I say go Polyev and go Jays. So anyways, please like, subscribe, share, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks. Bye.